The fall of ancient Egypt did not begin with a single invasion, a single battle, or a single disastrous ruler. It began quietly, a crack in a system that had seemed eternal. A system built upon divine kingship, sacred traditions, and the belief that the gods themselves guaranteed the stability of the world. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt stood as one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. Its pharaohs commanded vast armies. Its priests oversaw magnificent temples. Its architects raised monuments so extraordinary that they still dominate the landscape today. To the people who lived along the Nile, Egypt appeared unshakable. Yet beneath the splendor of golden temples and colossal statues, forces were gathering that would slowly reshape the kingdom forever. Powerful priests challenged royal authority. Foreign enemies pressed against the borders. Economic burdens grew heavier with every generation. Ancient institutions that had once united the land began to weaken. What followed was not a sudden collapse, but a centuries-long struggle for survival. Tonight we will journey through the final chapters of ancient Egypt, from its imperial golden age to its last pharaoh, and discover how one of history's greatest civilizations slowly transformed into something entirely new. To understand how ancient Egypt eventually declined, we must begin at the moment when it appeared stronger than ever before. Around 1550 BC, the rulers of Egypt's 18th dynasty achieved what many believed impossible. They expelled the Hyksos, foreign rulers who had controlled parts of Lower Egypt for more than a century. Their victory was more than a military triumph. It was a symbolic rebirth. Egypt emerged from conflict with renewed confidence and a determination to prevent foreign domination from ever happening again. What followed was the rise of the New Kingdom, the most powerful period in Egyptian history. Under Pharaoh Thutmose III, Egypt transformed into a true empire. Military campaigns carried Egyptian influence far beyond the Nile Valley. Territories stretching from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north paid tribute to the pharaoh. Gold, exotic goods, livestock, timber, precious stones, and skilled labor flowed into Egypt from every direction. The wealth was staggering. Temples expanded across the kingdom. Massive statues celebrated royal victories. Cities flourished under state-sponsored building projects. Trade networks connected Egypt to distant lands, bringing both prosperity and prestige. At the center of this success stood Thebes. Once a regional city, it became one of the richest and most magnificent capitals in the ancient world. Visitors arriving from foreign kingdoms would have been overwhelmed by the sight of towering temple complexes, colossal obelisks, and avenues lined with statues honoring the gods and kings of Egypt. During the reign of Amenhotep III, the empire reached extraordinary heights. His rule was marked by peace, wealth, and ambitious construction projects. Temples rose on an unprecedented scale. Palaces grew larger and more luxurious. Diplomatic relationships connected Egypt to nearly every major power in the Near East. To many observers, Egypt seemed invincible. The pharaoh was viewed as a living god. The Nile continued its dependable cycles. The temples overflowed with offerings and treasures. The future appeared secure. But beneath this remarkable success, a dangerous imbalance was developing. The temples dedicated to Amun, the chief god of Thebes, accumulated enormous wealth over generations. They controlled vast agricultural lands, workshops, herds, mines, and thousands of workers. Their influence extended far beyond religion. The priesthood became one of the most powerful institutions in Egypt. In some cases, the resources under their control rivaled those of the royal government itself. Few people realized it at the time, but a struggle for power was slowly taking shape. Then, everything changed. When Amenhotep IV inherited the throne, he launched one of the most radical transformations in Egyptian history. Rejecting traditional religious practices, he elevated a solar deity known as Aten above all others. Soon, he changed his name to Akhenaten. The message was clear. A new era had begun. Akhenaten ordered major changes throughout the kingdom. Traditional temples lost influence. The powerful priests of Amun saw their authority challenged. Ancient religious customs that had guided Egyptian society for centuries were suddenly questioned. Most dramatically, Akhenaten abandoned Thebes and built an entirely new capital city in the desert. He called it Akhetaten. There, surrounded by his family, including the famous Queen Nefertiti, he attempted to create a new vision of Egypt, centered on his religious revolution. But revolutions often come with consequences. Many Egyptians remained devoted to the traditional gods. Powerful religious leaders resisted the changes. Meanwhile, beyond Egypt's borders, allied rulers pleaded for military support as regional threats increased. The famous Amarna letters reveal repeated requests for assistance from Egypt's allies. Again and again, they asked for help. Too often, none arrived. While Akhenaten focused on transforming religion, Egypt's international position weakened. Confidence in royal leadership began to fade. The image of the pharaoh as the perfect guardian of order was slowly eroding. When Akhenaten died, his revolution collapsed almost immediately. His young successor, Tutankhamun, restored the traditional gods and attempted to repair the damage. The abandoned city of Akhetaten was gradually dismantled. Akhenaten's memory was deliberately erased from official records. Egypt had survived the crisis. The empire still stood. The monuments still rose above the desert. The pharaoh still ruled from his throne. Yet something fundamental had changed. For the first time in centuries, Egyptians had witnessed division at the highest levels of power. The Golden Age was not over, but the first cracks had appeared. And in the centuries ahead, those cracks would slowly widen into fractures that even the mightiest pharaohs could not repair. After the turmoil of Akhenaten's religious revolution, Egypt's rulers worked tirelessly to restore stability and rebuild confidence in the throne. The task would fall first to military leaders, and then to a new generation of pharaohs determined to revive the strength of the empire. One of them would become the most famous ruler in Egyptian history, Ramses II. Known today as Ramses the Great, he ascended the throne around 1279 BC and ruled for an astonishing 66 years. Few kings in world history enjoyed such a long reign, and even fewer left behind such an impressive legacy. Across Egypt, his presence seemed impossible to escape. His statues towered above temples. His name appeared on monuments from Nubia to the Mediterranean. Massive construction projects transformed the landscape, including the magnificent temples of Abu Simbel, carved directly into cliffs overlooking the Nile. To his subjects, Ramesses appeared larger than life. He embodied everything a pharaoh was supposed to be: warrior, builder, diplomat, and living representative of the gods. His greatest military challenge came against the Hittite Empire, Egypt's powerful rival in the Near East. The two superpowers collided at the famous Battle of Kadesh. Although neither side achieved a decisive victory, Egyptian inscriptions portrayed the battle as a glorious triumph. The event became one of the most celebrated episodes of Ramesses' reign and helped reinforce his image as an unstoppable ruler. Years later, Egypt and the Hittites signed what is often considered the world's earliest surviving peace treaty. It was a remarkable achievement. Yet behind the scenes, problems were accumulating. Maintaining a vast empire required enormous resources. Supporting armies, administrators, laborers, and monumental building projects placed increasing pressure on the state. The magnificent temples that symbolized Egypt's greatness came at a cost. Every new monument required stone, transportation, craftsmen, food supplies, and years of labor. While these projects enhanced the glory of the pharaoh, they also consumed tremendous amounts of wealth. At the same time, the temples themselves continued growing richer. The priesthood of Amun controlled vast estates and accumulated increasing influence throughout the kingdom. While royal authority remained strong during Ramesses' lifetime, the balance of power was slowly shifting. The warning signs were subtle. Most Egyptians likely never noticed them. Why would they? The empire was still prosperous. Foreign envoys still brought gifts. Temples remained active. The Nile still provided life to the land. But stability can sometimes conceal vulnerability. As Ramesses aged, the wider Mediterranean world began experiencing unprecedented upheaval. Around 1200 BC, powerful kingdoms across the region entered a period of crisis. Long-distance trade networks collapsed. Cities that had flourished for centuries were abandoned. Entire states disappeared from history. Among the forces associated with this era of disruption were groups known today as the Sea Peoples. Their exact origins remain uncertain. Some may have been refugees fleeing famine or environmental disasters. Others may have come from societies already collapsing under their own pressures. Whatever the cause, their arrival transformed the ancient world. The mighty Hittite Empire vanished. Major cities along the eastern Mediterranean coast fell into ruin. Trade routes that connected civilizations for generations suddenly became unreliable or disappeared altogether. Eventually, the storm reached Egypt. Under Ramesses III, Egyptian forces confronted repeated invasions by land and sea. Massive defensive efforts were organized to protect the kingdom. According to inscriptions at Medinet Habu, Egypt successfully repelled these attacks. It was one of the greatest defensive victories in Egyptian history. But victory came at a price. Wars drained the treasury. Military campaigns exhausted resources. Maintaining border security became increasingly expensive. To strengthen the army, large numbers of foreign captives and mercenaries were incorporated into Egyptian military service. At first, this seemed practical. Over time, however, it introduced profound changes. The army that had once represented the heart of Egypt's imperial power was becoming increasingly dependent on outsiders. New commanders gained influence. Regional leaders accumulated authority. Traditional structures slowly weakened. From a distance, Egypt still looked powerful. Its temples still dominated the landscape. Its pharaoh still sat upon the throne. Its monuments still inspired awe. Yet beneath the surface, the foundations of the empire were beginning to shift, and the consequences would soon become impossible to ignore. The true crisis of ancient Egypt did not begin with a foreign invasion. It began when Egyptians started losing faith in the institutions that had held their civilization together for centuries. For generations, the pharaoh had been more than a king. He was believed to be the guardian of Ma'at, the sacred balance that maintained harmony between humanity, nature, and the gods. As long as the pharaoh ruled effectively, Egypt prospered. But after the reign of Ramesses III, that confidence began to erode. Near the end of his life, a shocking conspiracy emerged within the royal court. Historical records preserved on ancient papyri reveal a plot involving members of the royal household, officials and servants who sought to place a different heir on the throne. The conspiracy was uncovered and many participants were punished, yet the damage was already done. The idea that a pharaoh could be threatened from within his own palace shattered centuries of assumptions about royal authority. Soon after, Egypt entered a prolonged period of decline. The rulers who followed Ramesses III lacked the power, prestige, and resources of their predecessors. One by one, successive pharaohs struggled to maintain control over a kingdom that was becoming increasingly difficult to govern. Economic problems worsened. Government officials became less effective. Regional leaders gained influence. And perhaps most alarming of all, corruption spread into institutions once considered sacred. Nowhere was this more visible than in the Valley of the Kings. For centuries, Egypt's rulers had prepared elaborate tombs filled with treasures intended to accompany them into the afterlife. These burial chambers contained precious objects, religious symbols, furniture, jewelry, and countless items believed necessary for eternity. They were supposed to remain untouched forever. Instead, many became targets. As state authority weakened, tomb robberies became increasingly common. Ancient judicial documents preserve the testimony of captured thieves, offering a rare and disturbing glimpse into the reality of the period. Groups of robbers entered royal tombs, searching for valuables. Gold was removed from burial equipment. Precious objects were carried away. Royal resting places that had once symbolized eternal order were violated by the very people responsible for protecting them. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Egyptian religion depended upon continuity, ritual, and respect for the dead. The pharaoh's journey into the afterlife was not simply a personal matter. It was connected to the stability of the entire cosmos. When royal tombs were no longer safe, confidence in the old order weakened even further. Alarmed by the growing crisis, loyal priests took extraordinary measures. Many royal mummies were secretly removed from their original tombs and hidden in carefully concealed caches. Their goal was preservation rather than display. Thanks to these efforts, some of Egypt's greatest rulers survived the chaos and were eventually rediscovered by archaeologists thousands of years later. Yet even these rescue efforts revealed a painful truth. The civilization that had built the pyramids could no longer fully protect its own kings. Political fragmentation soon followed. In Upper Egypt, the high priests of Amun accumulated enormous influence. In Lower Egypt, local rulers established competing centers of power. The kingdom that had once stretched across vast territories was now struggling to maintain unity within its own borders. Historians call this era the Third Intermediate Period. It was a time of division, rival dynasties, shifting alliances, and declining central authority. Foreign origin rulers increasingly entered Egyptian politics. Libyan leaders established powerful dynasties in the Delta region. In some periods, multiple kings ruled different parts of Egypt simultaneously. The age of a single, unquestioned pharaoh governing a united kingdom was fading into memory. Then, a new power emerged from the south. The kingdom of Kush, centered in Nubia, had long absorbed Egyptian culture, religion, and traditions. Its rulers admired the achievements of the ancient pharaohs and viewed themselves as legitimate heirs to Egypt's heritage. One Kushite king would change the course of history. His name was Pi. Determined to restore order, Pi marched north and gradually brought much of Egypt under his control. Unlike many conquerors, he presented himself not as a destroyer, but as a restorer of tradition. For a brief moment, hope returned. Temples were repaired. Ancient customs were revived. The dream of a united Egypt seemed possible once again. But beyond Egypt's borders, another empire was rising. A military power unlike anything the region had seen before. Assyria. The Assyrians had built one of the most formidable states in the ancient world. Their armies were disciplined, experienced, and relentlessly effective. City after city fell before them as their empire expanded across the Near East. Eventually, Egypt became their next target. Assyrian armies invaded repeatedly, capturing major cities and forcing Egyptian rulers into desperate resistance. Pharaoh Taharka fought to preserve his kingdom, but the pressure was overwhelming. Then came one of the most symbolic events in Egyptian history, the sack of Thebes. For centuries, Thebes had been the spiritual heart of Egypt. Its temples, monuments, and sacred spaces represented the power of both gods and kings. Now, even Thebes could not escape the changing world. The message was unmistakable. The old order was collapsing, and the civilization that once seemed eternal was entering its darkest chapter. Yet history rarely moves in a straight line. Just when it seemed that Egypt's long story was approaching its end, the kingdom experienced one final revival. In the 7th century BC, a ruler named Psamtik I emerged from the Nile Delta and accomplished something that many believed impossible. Taking advantage of the weakening Assyrian Empire, he gradually reunited Egypt under a single government. For the first time in generations, stability returned. Trade expanded once again, temples were restored, agriculture flourished. Diplomatic connections stretched across the Mediterranean. Egypt entered what historians now call the Saidi period, named after the city of Sais, where the new dynasty established its power. To many Egyptians, it felt like a rebirth. The rulers of this era admired the achievements of the ancient pharaohs and deliberately looked to the past for inspiration. Artists copied styles from centuries earlier. Architects revived traditional designs. Ancient titles and ceremonies returned to public life. It was as if Egypt were trying to reconnect with its greatest memories. But beneath the optimism lay an uncomfortable reality. The world had changed. The great empires of the Bronze Age were gone. New powers dominated international politics. Iron weapons had replaced bronze. Trade routes had shifted. Greek city-states were expanding their influence across the Mediterranean. Egypt remained respected, but it was no longer the center of the ancient world. Then a new empire appeared in the east, Persia. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire expanded with astonishing speed. Kingdom after kingdom fell under Persian control. By the late 6th century BC, only a few independent states remained beyond its reach. Egypt was one of them. In 525 BC, Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, launched an invasion of Egypt. The Egyptian army attempted to stop the Persian advance near Pelusium, a strategic fortress guarding the eastern approaches to the Nile Delta. The battle ended in disaster. The Persians emerged victorious, and Egypt became part of the largest empire the world had yet seen. For the first time in nearly 3,000 years of recorded history, Egypt was governed as a province of a foreign empire. Although revolts occasionally broke out and periods of independence briefly returned, the age of unquestioned Egyptian dominance was over. Yet another dramatic chapter still remained. In 332 BC, a young Macedonian king entered Egypt. His name was Alexander. Unlike the Persians, Alexander was welcomed by many Egyptians. He presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Priests recognized him as a legitimate ruler, and he embraced many aspects of Egyptian tradition. Before leaving, Alexander founded a city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. What began as a military foundation would eventually become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Its harbors connected continents. Its famous library attracted scholars from across the known world. Its lighthouse became one of the most celebrated structures ever built. After Alexander's death, Egypt passed into the hands of one of his generals, Ptolemy. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. They adopted the titles and ceremonies of the pharaohs, built magnificent temples, and supported Egyptian religious traditions. Yet they remained culturally Greek, governing through a system deeply influenced by the Hellenistic world. 2 civilizations now existed side by side. One looked back to the age of the pyramids, the other looked toward the future of the Mediterranean. And as these worlds merged, Egypt approached the final chapter of its ancient story. By the 1st century BC, Egypt remained wealthy, famous, and strategically important, but it was no longer the dominant power it had once been. The Ptolemaic kingdom was increasingly dependent on Rome, the rising superpower of the Mediterranean world. Amid political struggles and dynastic rivalries, one ruler emerged who would become the most famous queen in Egyptian history, Cleopatra VII. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra embraced both the Greek and Egyptian worlds. Intelligent, charismatic, and highly educated, she understood that Egypt's survival depended on navigating the dangerous politics of Rome. First, she formed an alliance with Julius Caesar. Later, after Caesar's assassination, she allied herself with Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful leaders. Together, they envisioned a future in which Egypt remained a major force in the Eastern Mediterranean. But standing against them was Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. The conflict culminated in 31 BC at the Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra were defeated. Within a year, both were dead, and Octavian annexed Egypt into the Roman Empire. For the first time since the dawn of Egyptian civilization, there would be no more pharaohs. The age of ancient Egypt had come to an end. Ancient Egypt did not vanish in a single moment. Its temples gradually fell silent. Its pharaohs disappeared into history. Its empire was absorbed by larger powers. Yet the civilization itself never truly died. Its knowledge, architecture, beliefs, and traditions continued to influence the worlds that followed. Greek scholars studied its wisdom. Roman rulers admired its monuments. Later generations preserved fragments of its language, culture, and memory. Even today, the pyramids still rise above the desert, reminding us of a civilization that endured for more than 3,000 years. The story of Egypt teaches us that no empire lasts forever. Power fades, kingdoms change, but great civilizations leave legacies that can outlive their rulers by thousands of years. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the fall of ancient Egypt. If you enjoyed this documentary, leave a comment telling us which period of Egyptian history fascinated you most, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the ancient world. And be sure to join us in the next episode, where another remarkable chapter of history awaits.